For the moment, quickly going across to Shavan Sen, joining us live at the moment. Shavan, hope you're keeping well. You know, we've seen how there's a lot of snowfall all around you, all across the regions from where you've been reporting. What's going on there? What is the current situation looking like?
Well, in fact, Krithwin, let me just quickly take you through. Republic has now reached yet another location in Korosten, which was bombed about 2 days ago. And take a look at this. We have now finally reached the very place where the bombing took place 2 days ago. And Korosten is in the northern Ukrainian region, which is not very far from Chernobyl. Remember the nuclear plant that came under attack of the Russians? That was about a few days ago. And take a look at the kind of destruction that has taken place here in Korosten. That roughly about 10 such places, 10 villages that have been attacked in this particular region where aerial bombardment took place. What I'm showing you right now are images of what remains in this village, where right now, even as we speak, I'm told that the rescue operation is still on some of the places, trying to clear the debris, as you see on your screens right now. These are the images, latest images of the bombing that took place about. But this very area that we are reporting from, this area has come under target of the Russians simply because of two reasons. One, this basically comes under their northern axis. While I'm speaking, I'll try and show you all the visuals. There's heavy snowstorm right now here in this northern part of Ukraine, and this certainly affects whatever little operations that they are basically carrying out behind me, trying to remove the debris so that this area can be cleared, the movement. Because remember, this village, as you go by, it connects to the main highway. It connects to the main highway and it goes straight towards Kyiv. That's why this is a strategic location. There are two parts to it. One, certainly, let me stay with the visuals that has been caused here. Take a look at it. It's a little difficult to walk through here simply because of two reasons. One, there has been heavy snow, and secondly, this area is complete. The tracks are muddy tracks, so it becomes a little difficult to go. And take a look at the crater that has been created because of the bombing. This is the crater that has been created, what you see, and those are the houses that have been damaged in this area of Korosten. Now Korosten becomes very important, as I was pointing out. 200, roughly about 150 is the upper limit I'm talking about. 150 kilometers as far as from the nuclear plant. And not to forget how the nuclear plant that came under attack. I'll also go across to my colleague Andre. Andre, if you can hear me. Andre, are you being able to hear me? Andre, we have reached this place called Korosten. What is it that you are seeing? Can you take our viewers through? Yeah, can you just show our viewers the visuals of the place that we have reached? What is the information that you are picking up from the local authorities, as I'm also trying to go a little closer and trying to get the visuals for all our viewers of the destruction that has been caused in this particular place where the bombing took place. Andre, over to you.
We've been traveling 4 hours to reach the Korosten, and here you can see all these houses how they've been destructed, and yeah, all these houses, and there's the big hole right there, like I can show you. Yeah. Just a minute.
So Andrew, as you show those visuals, I'll try and explain it all to our viewers where we are and why this becomes very important, and why is it that the Russians have chosen this very place to carry out the aerial bombardment. So we've, over the last 48 hours, what we have done is that we've gone to almost all locations which are extremely strategically very important for the Russians right now. Because if you look at it, while many would tell you that there are multiple accesses that have been opened by the Russian troops, but one of the main areas, or one of the main access, is from where we are standing. It's the Zhytomyr and this Korosten area, from where you have the Russian troops advancement taking place. So these bombings that have majorly taken place is in the night. In Zhytomyr, some of these bombings that took place was in the morning, and this route is essentially the route that is taken by the Russian troops to go a little closer. So you have some parts, Cherniv being one of the areas which have been completely taken over by the Russians. So the northern part, if you look at it, the northern part moving towards Kyiv is the very place which has now been taken over by the Russians. They've been able to take control of those very areas. It's only towards the south that you look at the Ukrainians have had some hold. Not very far from where we are is the very city that has been taken control by the Russian troops. This place is still under the control of the Ukrainians at this point in time. But that is the reason why those areas which still the Ukrainians have control over, those are the places where the bombings are essentially taking place. My colleague Mridul is also at another spot where the bombing actually took place. I'll just turn over the camera. Keep showing you some of the visuals. It's certainly very difficult to navigate in this very area. As you can see, the impact of the bombing that actually took place. What you see right now on your screens is a village where people were actually staying when the bombing took place, and this was at the night when the bombing took place. So that is the reason why there have been casualties here. If the first numbers that we have got from the local administration is roughly about 9 casualties is what we have been told, which also includes women and children. And as you see, similar images that we got you about 24 hours ago was from another area. If I can go across to Andre. Andre, if you can hear me, describe a little bit the area that we are in and how many people, how many houses that were bombed. So how many houses were bombed? What is the information that you're getting from the what is the information that you're getting from the local administration?
Due to official sources that we can be given, around 10 houses on this street I am standing right now had been destroyed, and like around 9 people, there's like 9 casualties from this bombardment that took place at the night when peaceful people were just sleeping on 6 Mars.
And Andre, if you can also tell our viewers, this area, which is not very far from the Chernobyl nuclear plant, and the fact that this is also, if you go straight up, is the Belarus border. Andre, can you hear me?
Can you just repeat, please? I can't hear you. Yeah.
Andre, if you could just explain it to our viewers, the importance of this very place, because the Russian advancement that has basically been taking place is from this very axis. So why is it that this area where we are reporting from, this becomes very important for the Russians?
I think that they just want to take the Zhytomyr and then this city, Zhytomyr, and they can like easily encircle Kyiv to capture it. You know, like, and there is no like a very important infrastructure like military. There is only residential houses in this city too. So I don't know why they bombed the city like those houses.
Well, just to add to what Andre was pointing out, this is exactly the situation. You don't have places where there are strategic military bases which are just being attacked. These are civilian areas which are being bombed. Now, the reason why these civilian areas are being bombed are two. They're twofold. One, certainly being that this comes on the way towards Kyiv. So if they can take control of Zhytomyr and these very areas, Korosten, then perhaps it becomes far more easier for the Russians to basically encircle Kyiv. And not to forget that this would actually give them a direct access to Kyiv. So this particular road, which is now, as we speak right now, this is being cleared up so that, the Ukrainians can have full control over it. So while we were coming on our way, we've come across at least 5 to 6 checkpoints. In fact, in one checkpoint, when we were stopped, there was firing that was actually taking place. In fact, you've had some of the Ukrainian soldiers opening fire simply because, right now they are on the edge, because given the fact that this is the area where they suspect that even you have Russian troops, not only the conventional Russian troops that are there, but also agents who could be in and around these areas picking up more information so that that can be passed on to the Russian troop and they can actually plan their entire movement. So that is the reason why right now the Ukrainians have also been completely on the tenterhooks. And while we were coming, the checking has certainly been increased. And just to put this into perspective, why this, since it's not very far away from the Chernobyl nuclear plant, that's the place where, remember, there was artillery fire that was open, missile strikes that took place in those very areas. But thankfully, there was no radioactive presence, and that was basically contained. But also that led to more the battle between Ukraine and Russia just basically intensifying after that attack that took place in Chernobyl. And now if you look at it, if I can try and explain this entire area for all our viewers who are tuning in right now. So we are basically in the northern Ukrainian area, which is not very far from Zhytomyr, the place where we were just about 48 hours ago, from where we've got you those latest images of how schools, colleges, and not just that, religious places were also bombed. But now we have come to another location, and this location is called Korosten. Now, Korosten is on the northern side and about 150 kilometers, 150 kilometers, if I'm not wrong, from the Chernobyl nuclear plant. And this is the axis, if I can tell you, this is the axis that's been taken by the Russian troops for their movement. So let me just try and go across to the main road and also try and show you the images of this entire area. So the destruction that was caused because of the aerial bombardment, and this is the entire area. As you can see, this is the entire area that has been affected because of the aerial bombardment that took place. And if we go straight down, that's where the crater has been created, and right now you see the local authorities trying to clear up this entire area so that the access to the Ukrainian army is clearer, and they do not have much impediment with their as they move around. There are not much obstacles. But remember, by this particular crater that has been created, the movement in this area would certainly become very difficult. Manning this area would become a little bit more difficult. That's the reason why what they're trying to do is level this entire area. This area is level. And you also have some locals right now going back to their houses and trying to collect whatever is remaining, whatever hasn't been damaged. Similar images that you've seen on almost in every other area that we've actually gone to. In fact, my colleague Rhythm has also been there in another area. What I'll try and do is I'll try and go across to the other camera. I'll go to the other camera and I'll just tell our producers that to perhaps change my audio so that it's easier for our viewers to understand what's happening. I'll just change the camera right now, and well, if you can hear me right now, let me take up yours to in moving from one city to the other. We started from the eastern side because that's from eastern Kharkiv, where the bombing was actually taking place, and even till date there are 4 areas which I would say is now under complete Russian control. Take a look at what's happening in Sumy, Cherniv, Kharkiv. These are places that have been taken under full control of the Russians. And now the northern side, where we are currently reporting from. 48 hours ago, we were in Zhytomyr, and now we have come to Korosten. Korosten is a place which is about 150 kilometers, roughly about 150 kilometers from Chernobyl. That's the nuclear plant where the missile attack took place a few days ago, and there was artillery fire that led to a massive I'm sorry, because there's been a little difficulty in moving from here. So just coming back to what I was trying to tell you, that this particular axis towards the Chernobyl nuclear plant is the very axis that the Russians are now taking in terms of their movement. They're trying to regroup is what the Ukrainian army is indicating, while the Ukrainian army is also insisting that they've lost steam. The Russian troops have lost steam while they're basically moving towards Kyiv, and they've not been able to completely encircle the area. We'll have to be a little careful while we move, but so we'll try and be here and go from there probably. So yeah, as I was pointing out, that they've not been very completely successful in encircling this entire area. That's the reason why these very places where they're trying to take control. So once they are able to take control, their movement from the northern side towards Kyiv would become far more easier than what's the situation right now. Right now what's happening is that in one particular area, that's in Irpin, is where the battle is actually taking place. But the Russians haven't been very successful in that very area, because what the Ukrainians are basically pointing out is that they've been able to stop the Russian army across the bridge in Irpin. The bridge has been blown off, and the movement of the Russian troops have been slowed down. So what happens is that if these areas are taken full control of, then the movement of the troops becomes far more easier. That's the reason why, even though this place where we are, there is no military base, there is no military infrastructure of the Ukrainian army, but despite that, look at what is really happening. The kind of bombing that's actually taking place. Let me just try and show you what's happening here right now. This is right inside a house where what I can see in front of my eyes is that this perhaps would have been the living room of someone, which has been completely destroyed. There you have the kitchen on the other side. That's also been completely destroyed. And as I was pointing out, over the last few days, what's really happened is that the Russians are not only carrying out missile strikes, but they have started aerial bombing most of these areas. And when the aerial bombing is actually taking place, what happens is that it covers a larger area. So that's the reason why, at least what we're being told, is that 10 households in this very place have been completely damaged. Take a look at it. Right now, even as the snowfall has been increasing, I can still smell the charred remains of these households. And it becomes a little difficult to move around because the road has become far more slippery. So, as I was pointing out, these are the areas that we have covered so far. I would say that over 10 cities have already been covered by the Republic Media Network. And what we are witnessing is that while the focus of the Russian remains Kyiv and the siege of Kyiv, which many would say is imminent, which could happen in the next 2 to 3 days, is what some of the security analysts are pointing out. Some of those reports that have been prepared by these intelligence agencies also suggest that the siege of Kyiv is inevitable. But how long would that take place? Because on the ground, what's really happening is that the Russians haven't been able to completely encircle Kyiv or ensure that their troops are there on all sides. That's the reason why, especially the axis, which becomes a little easier for the Russians in terms of their movement, because remember, they have their command units, multiple units that are already in Belarus. and it's easier for them to carry out their entire movement. And you also have access to the airfields in Belarus. The Ukrainians say that at least 3 such airfields have already been activated, so it's easier for them to carry out their military operations in these very areas. So as they clear out these areas by carrying out aerial bombardment, so what happens is that after the aerial bombardment, most of the places that you see in and around would have been evacuated, and civilians would have left those places. And once that happens, the battle comes on the street itself. So the Ukrainians, while they have been far more successful in terms of stopping the Russians, at least on the ground, it's the aerial power that's where the Ukrainians are finding it very, very challenging. That's the reason why the emphasis right now for the Ukrainians have been to ensure that the NATO comes together as far as a no-fly out zone is concerned, which has been rejected, and that's the reason why this is becoming very difficult. If you also go by the update that was put out by the General Staff of Armed Forces around 6 o'clock this morning, they've admitted that at least a few places like Sumy, Cherniv, Kharkiv, these are now under control of the Russians, and they're saying they call the Russians as the occupiers. The occupiers have taken control, what they say, a temporary control of these areas, but the battle still continues. But as such images reaches the households outside Ukraine, what becomes very clear is that these are not military bases that are being targeted, and that's exactly what my colleague Andre was also pointing out, that why it's very difficult for people to at least fathom that why would these civilian areas be targeted by the Russians at this point in time. The reason is very clear. The reason is to basically take some control of these areas, to clear up the access, so that once the access is clear, the movement of the Russian troops on the ground becomes far more easier. Well, in fact, just to encapsulate what we have covered so far, while we stay with some of these images, as we started about 10 days ago from the eastern Ukrainian side, covering some of those separatist regions like Luhansk and Donetsk, what we've witnessed is that those areas at this point in time appear to be in some control of the Russians. If you come towards the northern side, there is still a battle that is going on. This is the very place where the battle still continues, so that the Russians are in a position to take some control of the road. They are in some position to control some of the cities where the aerial bombardments have been taking place for several days put together. In the last 48 hours itself, I can tell you that at least 4 places in and around the very area where we are broadcasting from, the bombardments have taken place, resulting in civilian casualties. The number here in the place where we are standing is about 9 deaths that have taken place in this area. Schools, I'm told that about over 200 schools have been destroyed in the aerial bombardment that have taken place in the northern Ukrainian area itself. And not to forget that this is the place just above the northern border that has been shared with Belarus, is the advantageous side of the Russians, because the Russians are carrying out most of their military operation using Belarus. In fact, the Ukrainians have now come on record to basically say that not just the airfields, but the military drills that were basically being carried out by the Russians that have yielded some result. And that is the reason why you're looking at much of the specialized forces of the Russian troops being able to enter from the northern side. However, in some of the areas, they're trying to regroup, is what we are being told. In some areas, they've stopped the entire the entire convoy of armored vehicles, which was about 60 miles long. That has also slowed down to a great extent. And what the Ukrainians have been a little successful is in stopping the Russians right at Irpin, where there's been constant battle that's been taking place. In fact, there was a missile attack that took place in Irpin yesterday, is what we are being told, that led to a civilian death. And in these areas, as you can see, what the Russians are doing is carrying out the aerial bombardments at night. So many of the areas that we are witnessing right now, civilian areas that have been completely damaged, as you can see right now. These households, about 10 such households have been damaged in the aerial bombardment that took place. So clearly things changing with every passing day. While on the one hand, we are talking about negotiations. Both sides earlier in the day indicated that negotiations can take place, but there shouldn't be any precondition. Yesterday, after the third round of talks that took place between Russia and Ukraine, you've had the presidential advisor of Ukraine indicating that they have made some progress, having said that they have not divulged any details of those talks simply because they believe that it would be premature to do so. And what they're trying to work out is those humanitarian corridors. You already have the Russians announcing that there would be a humanitarian corridor so that the evacuation can take place in places like Sumy. But even as these announcements have been made, there are reports that have been doing the rounds that there have been shelling that has taken place in Kharkiv, for instance. There is shelling that has taken place in Sumy. Sumy happens to be one of the worst affected after Kharkiv. And a lot of students have also been trapped because of the gunfight that has been taking place in these areas. And Sumy, as I understand by the update that was put out this morning, that Sumy is now in control of the Russians. Kharkiv is now in control of the Russians. Cherniv is now in control of the Russians. So you're looking at three important territories that are now in control of the Russians. But the focus, while it remains in Kyiv, the siege of Kyiv that many are indicating is imminent. It's going to take place. It could take about 2 to 3 days. But the movement that is taking place of the Russian army, important to point out, it's not from all directions. Kyiv has not been encircled as many would like to believe. But the ground reality is that Kyiv has not been completely encircled. It's one axis that the Russians are really focusing on, and that's the northern axis, and that's the reason why we are trying to cover most of the northern axis to try and give you an understanding of what exactly are the Russians doing right now, how exactly are they moving, and what's the impact on the ground. So the direct impact is this, what you see behind me, civilian deaths that are taking place, because while the Russians are trying to clear these areas to ensure that this entire area is empty and the movement becomes far more easier. These dirt tracks that you are seeing, the Ukrainians are now trying to clear this area, level this area, so that while if you go straight down from here, you would find multiple checkpoints that have come up. And those checkpoints are a little different from the other areas, because here the focus is to ensure that if at all there is any ground movement by the Russians, they are able to stop the movement. The movement should not take place. That's the key focus right now of the Ukrainians. And apart from that, what is very important to point out here is that if at all the Russians are successful in trying to move from this area, move towards Kyiv, then they would have a successful regrouping actually taking place. And if that successful regrouping takes place, then as what many was suggesting, that the siege of Kyiv would become far more easier for the Russians. While the Russians have also indicated right now that they are willing to cease any kind of military operation, but they have put out at least three conditions. One, that Ukraine should recognize Crimea as a territory of Russia. Ukraine should also recognize the two separatist regions, Donetsk and Lugansk. And also, as far as the Constitution of Ukraine is concerned, there shouldn't be any room available for Ukraine to be part of any bloc. For that matter, be it NATO or any other bloc, especially a bloc which is floated by the West, Ukrainians shouldn't be part of it. Now, those are some of the conditions that have been laid out by the Russians. But Ukraine has made it very clear that they are not willing to compromise with their territorial integrity. They are not willing to compromise with their territorial sovereignty. So while all of this is happening, on the ground what you see are these kind of images. On a daily basis, as we travel from one area to the other, what becomes abundantly clear are these images where civilians are to face the brunt of it. And as we have been saying in almost every report that we have filed so far from Ukraine, is that this is not a war just between two armies. This is now becoming a war between one army and the people of that country. Ukrainians right now have joined their armed forces. If you go to most of these territorial defense units across Ukraine, you would now come across not just army men, but you would actually come across Ukrainians, locals who have now participated, who are now trying to help their army. They're trying to help protect their land. And while we come to these areas, remember, one of the bigger challenge that we face is also to navigate through those checkpoints, trying to convince them that we are journalists who are trying to document what's really happening on the ground. The Ukrainians right now are a little bit far more suspicious than what they would have been in ordinary times, simply because they believe that the Russians are not only carrying out a conventional war, but they are also, what they're trying to do, they call these psychological combat units of the Russian troops, which means that they would have these Russian agents who would be mingling with the people here. They're trying to carry out, carry out these fake information about the Ukrainian government, about the struggle that the Ukrainians are facing, so that they are in a position to try and convince the Ukrainians that this is a war not worth fighting. That's what they're attempting to do. But how far have they really been successful? One will certainly have to wait and watch, because while they've been able to capture certain territory, but there is a massive pushback that we are also seeing. We have entered the 13th day of the war, and what we are seeing unfolding before our eyes is this large-scale destruction in almost every city. So while the whole world is focusing right now as to what exactly is going to happen in Kyiv, but what we are forgetting is that in doing so, we are losing out these images, the repercussion of what's really happening between both the nations, where civilians are being constantly targeted. Look at the numbers that have been projected by the United Nations in terms of the refugees, in terms of the displacement that's taking place, the migration that's actually taking place. You've had other countries opening up their borders, Poland opening their border, Hungary opening their border so that people can leave from here. But what happens is that if you really come to areas which aren't very prosperous, or areas where you have Ukrainians who do not have the wherewithal, you would find them staying back. They're staying back in their homes, but it's their homes which are now being targeted. These homes where people were actually staying. So these are not places where the evacuation has taken place, or these are not places where people are leaving their homes. These are places where people were still living with the hope that they'll remain untouched. But what's happening is that without much provocation, you're looking at most of these places being bombarded by the Russians. The Russians have bombarded these very places. These are civilian places. And in the last 48 hours, we've come across various civilian areas, barring the place that we went to yesterday, that was in Vinnytsia. Vinnytsia is the place where the military base was targeted, and aerial bombing took place. Missiles were also dropped. About 7 missiles were dropped in Vinnytsia, but that was a military area. But apart from that, if you look at what the report that we filed earlier from Zhytomyr, which is again on the northern side, if you look at Zhytomyr also, there too you've had schools, you've had colleges, you've had hospitals, and now just yesterday we're being told that churches were also targeted by the Russians. So clearly what is happening is that while these so-called negotiations that are supposed to take place, the offensive from the air, from the ground, is still continuing. Place where the bombing took place 2 days ago, and Korosten is in the northern Ukrainian region, which is not very far from Chernobyl. Remember the nuclear plant. Yes, I can hear you.